Nadia Carter entered the establishment seeking only a tranquil beverage. To Ray Maddox, she appeared as any other solitary female patron at the bar, an uncomplicated target for crude amusement. He sauntered forward with his entourage flanking him, each step a deliberate challenge to her quietude. Then came the sharp, uncivilized impact, its loudness reverberating throughout the room, eliciting guffaws from his associates. What Ree failed to perceive, however, was the profound stillness behind her composed gaze. 20 years of rigorous Delta Force preparation, covert operations buried deep within classified archives, a lifetime dedicated to precision and measured response. He assumed she would avert her head and endure. He was mistaken. In a single, swift maneuver, Nadia Carter was about to reacquaint everyone present with the consequences of unbridled arrogance confronting military discipline. Before we proceed further, please share your geographical location in the comment section, and be sure to subscribe, as tomorrow's narrative is one you absolutely will not want to miss. The late afternoon sun, stretching long, tenebrous fingers through the dusty panes of Bulldog's den, marked Nadia Carter's entry. Her eyes adjusted to the subdued illumination within. A country melody emanated from a vintage jukebox in a corner, vying with the percussive rhythm of billiard balls and the murmur of conversations. The pervasive scent of stale ale and tobacco smoke filled her senses. Nadia moved with an understated self-assurance, her footsteps nearly inaudible on the worn floorboards. Her well-toned arms, a testament to years of service, were visible beneath her simple white tank top. A faint scar on her right shoulder, a memento from an operation in Kandahar, caught the light. She selected a seat at the furthest extremity of the bar, deliberately distant from the circle of regulars engrossed in their drinks. The wooden stool emitted a slight groan as she settled, her posture relaxed yet vigilant. Old ingrained habits died hard. The proprietor, a man in his middle years with salt and pepper temples and weary eyes, approached. "What can I get for you?" he inquired, wiping his hands on a stained bar rag. "Whiskey. Straight." Nadia responded, her voice a low, even cadence. She placed a $20 bill on the counter, her action fluid and intentional. The bartender acknowledged with a nod, reaching for a bottle from the rack behind him. Nadia's gaze swept the room, absorbing every detail without appearing to actively observe. 3 individuals on motorcycles were engaged in a game of pool, their leather vests adorned with insignia she recognized from her prior intelligence assessments. 2 couples occupied alcoves along the wall, maintaining their privacy. A solitary man slumbered at the opposite end of the bar, his head lolling precariously close to his nearly depleted glass. The whiskey arrived, its amber hue reflecting the weak luminescence of the dusty overhead fixtures. Nadia enveloped the glass with her fingers, exhaling slowly. The day spent at the Veteran Support Center had been demanding but fulfilling. She had assisted a young Marine with his disability claims paperwork and provided counsel to an Army sergeant navigating the transition to civilian life. These endeavors provided her with a sense of grounding, a purpose that transcended the clandestine missions that had defined her professional path. She took a modest sip, appreciating the warmth. Behind her, a boisterous laugh erupted, clearly intended to command attention. Nadia did not turn. Instead, she observed the bartender's reflection in the mirrored surface behind the bottles, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders. The main entrance was violently thrown open, admitting a gust of humid air and the resonant thrum of motorcycle engines. Heavy bootfalls echoed on the wooden floor, accompanied by the clinking of chains and the creak of leather. The ambient mood of the establishment instantly transformed. Conversation ceased. Pool cues froze mid-action, and numerous patrons abruptly became intensely focused on their beverages. In the mirror's reflection, Nadia observed the ingress of 5 men. Their distinctive leather vests identified them as members of the Iron Dogs MC, a local motorcycle fraternity notorious for its control over illicit activities across 3 counties. Their principal, Ray Bulldog Maddox, stood a head taller than the rest, his imposing physique occupying more space than necessary. Nadia had reviewed his dossier during her initial week in town. 3 prior accusations of assault, suspected involvement in narcotics distribution, yet no convictions. The local law enforcement's apparent reticence to press charges revealed the extent of systemic corruption in the region. She took another sip of whiskey, preserving her composed demeanor, as the jukebox segued into a Merle Haggard tune concerning outlaws, the irony not lost on her. The bartender, having retreated to the far end of the bar, appeared exceedingly occupied, polishing glasses that were already pristine. The motorcyclists claimed their customary table, their voices escalating as they ordered their initial round. Nadia could sense eyes fixed on her back, but she offered no acknowledgement. She had spent years honing the art of being present yet unobtrusive, of merging with her surroundings while maintaining acute awareness of any potential threat. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass, recalling analogous scenarios in countless nations, with varied tongues and armaments, yet the fundamental dynamics of power and coercion remained constant. She had confronted warlords and illicit merchants, survived firefights and ambushes. This was familiar terrain, irrespective of the setting. "Hey, Bobby," Maddox's voice boomed across the room. "Where's that beer? Don't make me come over there and serve it myself." The bartender, Bobby, hastened to deliver their drinks, his hands trembling slightly as he placed the bottles down. Laughter erupted from their table, sharp and malevolent. Nadia noted how the other patrons seemed to contract, attempting to render themselves invisible. She glanced at her watch. 6:45 in the evening. The shelter would be closing around now. Mark and Sarah would be managing the evening protocols she had instituted. They were good individuals, both of them. Army veterans seeking to reintegrate into civilian society. They reminded her of her younger self, learning to cope with the burden of her experiences. The din from the bikers' table intensified. A chair scraped loudly across the floor, followed by heavy footfalls. In the mirror, Nadia observed Maddox rise. His gaze locked onto her. He nudged one of his companions, indicating her direction with a smirk that presaged trouble. His retinue exchanged knowing glances, settling in to witness the spectacle their leader had orchestrated. Ray Bulldog Maddox commenced his advance toward the bar, his progress deliberate and predatory. His reflection grew larger in the mirror as he neared, akin to a predator assessing what it perceived to be vulnerable prey. He was utterly unaware that the quiet woman in the white tank top had once commanded elite military formations, that her serene exterior concealed extensive combat exposure and tactical proficiency. The distance between them diminished with each ponderous step. The jukebox transitioned to a Hank Williams classic as Ray's footsteps drew closer. Nadia maintained her forward gaze, observing his approach in the mirror while preserving her practiced immobility. She took another measured sip of whiskey, allowing the warmth to linger. The other patrons shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing the imminent confrontation. A couple near the exit discreetly settled their bill, departing before the unfolding events could commence. The pool players ceased their game entirely, cues held loosely as they watched their leader stalk toward the bar. Ray's labored breathing carried the aroma of cheap beer as he closed the distance. His reflection revealed a broad, cruel smile stretching across his face, the kind of expression that had likely preceded innumerable acts of intimidation in this very establishment. The fluorescent lights glinted off the silver rings adorning his fingers, makeshift brass knuckles that had left their mark on numerous unfortunate individuals. "Well, well," Ray drawled, his voice amplified sufficiently for his crew to hear. "What do we have here? Don't usually see your sort frequenting my establishment." Nadia offered no reply. She raised her glass again, her movements smooth and controlled. Her peripheral vision tracked his every action, while she appeared preoccupied with her drink. Years of training had equipped her to interpret a situation through the minutest details, the subtle shift in balance preceding an assault, the tightening of muscles before a blow. Behind Ray, his crew had positioned themselves in a loose semicircle, anticipating the entertainment their leader had devised. They nudged each other, snickering and whispering. The bartender had retreated to the opposite end of the bar, suddenly engrossed in rearranging bottles that required no organization. "Hey, I'm addressing you," Ray stated, moving nearer. His massive frame now obscured the majority of the light from the overhead fixtures, casting a shadow across the bar. "Don't you have any manners?" Nadia placed her glass down carefully, perfectly centered on the coaster. Her fingers remained loosely curled around it, poised but relaxed. She had experienced comparable situations before, not within bars, but in secure compounds and safe houses globally, awaiting the opportune moment while maintaining absolute self-command. Ray leaned against the bar, deliberately encroaching on her personal space. "Come on, sugar. Don't be like that. We are all friends here." He glanced back at his crew, who responded with synchronized laughter. The sound echoed off the walls, harsh and unnatural. The atmosphere in the bar grew palpably heavier, charged with anticipation. Even the jukebox seemed to play at a lower volume, as if the machine itself sought to avoid drawing attention. Nadia remained motionless, her breathing even and controlled. She could detect the scent of Ray's leather apparel, the amalgamation of cigarettes and motor oil that clung to him. Perhaps she's shy, one of Ray's associates commented. "Why don't you help her relax, boss?" Ray's grin widened, exposing tobacco-stained teeth. "Yeah, perhaps that's it. She just needs a little persuasion to be amicable." He shifted his weight, and Nadia registered the movement mentally, calculating vectors and distances without apparent motion. Her muscles remained relaxed, yet poised, like a compressed spring awaiting release. She had dedicated years to perfecting this state of contained readiness. The ensuing moments seemed to unfold in protracted slow motion. Ray's arm drew back, his rings catching the light. His crew leaned forward, anticipating the climax. The remaining patrons held their breath, some averting their gaze, others unable to detach their eyes from the unfolding drama. The sharp impact landed squarely on Nadia's right buttock, the sound echoing with startling clarity in the hushed bar. Ray's laughter erupted, joined by cheers and howls from his associates. He turned toward them, arms outstretched in a gesture of triumph, clearly expecting to witness his victim collapse in abject humiliation. Instead, Nadia reacted. Years of close-quarters combat training assumed immediate command. Her body responded with the fluid, precise efficiency honed through countless drills and real-world engagements. In a single, seamless motion, she pivoted on the bar stool, her right hand lashing out to secure Ray's wrist before he could fully retract it. Her grip located the critical pressure points between his tendons, her fingers applying precise force learned during special operations training. The initial movement was almost gentle, until it decidedly was not. She rotated his wrist to an angle that sent jolting pain up his arm, leveraging his own bodily mass and momentum against him. Ray's eyes widened in disbelief as his knees buckled. His substantial physique now worked against him, gravity pulling his massive frame downward as Nadia maintained unwavering pressure on his immobilized wrist. He attempted resistance, but each exertion only intensified the pain. The bar fell into absolute silence. The jukebox had concluded a track, leaving only the sound of Ray's surprised grunt as his knees met the wooden floor. His associates stood rigid, their smug expressions replaced by gaping astonishment at the sight of their leader, subdued by this seemingly unassuming woman. Nadia leaned down, her movements deliberate and controlled. Her lips grazed Ray's ear as she spoke, her voice imbued with the cold authority of one accustomed to unquestioning obedience in life-or-death situations. "Touch me again," she whispered, sustaining the exact pressure necessary to maintain his incapacitation. "And you won't be using that hand." The threat hung in the air, amplified by its quiet delivery. Every individual in the bar was transfixed, witnessing an unprecedented event. Their formidable leader, the infamous Bulldog, brought to his knees by a woman a fraction of his size. The silence persisted for another moment as Nadia released her grip on Ray's wrist with the same measured precision with which she had seized it. He stumbled backward, his boots scraping against the floorboards as he struggled to regain his equilibrium. His face flushed a deep crimson that suffused down his neck and vanished beneath his leather vest. Ray clutched his wrist, rotating it cautiously as if assessing for injury. His eyes flickered between Nadia and his crew, who shifted uncomfortably behind him. The formidable Bulldog had been humbled, and all waited to observe his reaction. "You," he began, his voice trembling with a mixture of fury and mortification, his uninjured hand clenched into a fist, the rings glinting under the bar lights. Nadia turned back toward the bar, deliberately presenting her back to him, a clear indication that she considered him no longer a threat. She retrieved her whiskey glass with the same steady hand that had just subdued him, examining the amber liquid as if it were the most captivating object in the room. One of Ray's associates, a lanky man with a patchy beard, stepped forward. "Boss, you want us to." Ray interrupted sharply, his voice cracking slightly, diminishing the intended command. The lanky man retreated, rejoining the uncertain cluster of onlookers. The jukebox resumed, this time with LYNYRD-SKYNYRD's Simple Man. The familiar chords seemed to dissipate some of the tension, reminding everyone they were still in a bar on a typical evening. A few patrons returned to their drinks, though their eyes periodically darted back to the unfolding scene. Nadia lifted her glass to her lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The whiskey caught the light, golden and smooth. She savored it fully, allowing the warmth to spread through her chest. Her posture remained relaxed yet alert. Her body was poised to respond to any foolish attempts at retaliation. Behind her, Ray's breathing remained heavy and uneven. She could hear him shifting his weight, likely deliberating between his anger and his newfound weariness. His crew murmured amongst themselves, their usual bravado supplanted by uncertain whispers. The bartender had edged closer once more, perhaps sensing that the immediate danger had subsided. He busied himself by wiping down the already immaculate counter, deliberately avoiding eye contact with anyone involved in the confrontation. Nadia placed her empty glass down with a soft clink. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a crisp $20 bill, positioning it precisely beside the glass. The movement was fluid and unhurried, as if she were simply concluding a pleasant evening. Ray regained his voice. "You think you can just— Your tab is covered too," Nadia interjected, adding another 20 without acknowledging him. Her voice carried easily through the bar, calm and clear. A few individuals at nearby tables could not suppress their snickers. This seemed to fracture something within Ray. His face contorted with rage, the veins in his neck bulging. "You uppity, don't," Nadia interrupted, finally turning to face him. Her eyes met his, and something in that unwavering gaze compelled him to take a small step backward. "You really don't want to finish that sentence." The bar collectively held its breath. Ray's crew exchanged glances between their leader and this woman, who appeared utterly unfazed by him, clearly uncertain how to navigate this unprecedented situation. The established pattern of intimidation and violence had been entirely disrupted. Nadia rose from her bar stool, her movements measured and controlled. She adjusted her tank top with casual precision, then ran a hand over her ponytail, smoothing it back into perfect order. Every aspect of her demeanor conveyed calm competence. "Get her!" Ray suddenly bellowed, his voice strained with desperation, but his crew hesitated, looking at each other uncertainly. They had witnessed her action against their leader with only one hand. None of them appeared eager to test their fortune. Nadia walked toward the door, her steps unhurried but purposeful. The crowd parted before her, creating a clear passage. Some offered a slight nod as she passed. A few even smiled. She had shown them something remarkable. Someone standing up to the infamous bulldog and walking away unharmed. Ray's face twisted into an ugly grimace. "This isn't over," he shouted at her retreating figure. "You hear me? You'll regret this." Nadia reached the door and pushed it open, allowing a gust of cool night air to enter. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the gravel, and crickets chirped in the darkness beyond. She paused momentarily, her eyes scanning the area with practiced efficiency, assessing sightlines, noting potential cover, and identifying possible threats. The lot was partially filled with motorcycles and pickup trucks, their chrome and paint dulled by the yellow security illumination. Nothing moved except the moths circling the lights and a stray piece of paper tumbling across the gravel. Ray's voice followed her out into the night, still issuing threats and obscenities. But his words seemed to lose their potency in the open air, becoming merely another element of background noise, akin to the crickets and the distant hum of highway traffic. Nadia proceeded to her vehicle, her keys already in hand. The familiar silhouette of her dark blue sedan waited precisely where she had left it, undisturbed. She unlocked it and slipped inside, the leather seat embracing her like an old acquaintance. Nadia's car purred softly as she turned onto her street, the headlights sweeping across familiar residences. The neighborhood was tranquil at this hour, featuring modest homes with well-tended lawns, American flags displayed on porches, and the occasional children's bicycle left unattended in a driveway. She had specifically chosen this street for its quiet normalcy, a place where she could blend in and forge a new existence. The dashboard clock indicated 10:47 in the evening. A few windows still glowed with television light, but most of her neighbors had retired for the night. Mrs. Peterson's cat observed from its customary vantage point on the front windowsill next door, its eyes reflecting green in the car's headlights. Nadia activated her garage door opener, but a subtle premonition made her pause before entering. Years of training had instilled in her a deep trust in her instincts, and at this moment, something felt amiss. She left the car idling in the driveway, its engine emitting a low rumble in the night silence. The security light above her garage illuminated, triggered by her vehicle's presence. The harsh fluorescent glow revealed what her headlights had not quite discerned, angry red lettering spray painted across her white garage door. The paint was still wet, running down in drips like blood. "You're dead." Her jaw tightened imperceptibly, the sole outward manifestation of her reaction. The message was crude, designed to instill terror, but it primarily ignited a profound, cold anger, not the volatile rage that clouds judgment, but the kind that hones focus to an acute edge. Nadia switched off her car and exited, her boots crunching softly on the concrete. The night air had significantly cooled, carrying the aroma of freshly mown grass, and now, the pungent chemical odor of spray paint. A dog barked somewhere down the street, then fell silent. She approached the garage door slowly, scanning the surroundings with practiced ease. The paint application was hasty, the uneven letters betraying unsteady hands, likely executed within the past hour. Given its still wet state, the perpetrators would have required transport, most likely a motorcycle, considering the timing and the individuals involved. Mrs. Peterson's porch light illuminated. "Nadia, is everything all right, dear?" The elderly woman's voice carried clearly through the night air, tinged with concern. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Peterson," Nadia called back, her voice steady and reassuring. "Just some youngsters with spray paint. Nothing to be worried about." "Oh, those ruffians. Should I call the authorities?" "There's no need," Nadia responded. "I'll handle this." She held back until Mrs. Peterson's dwelling grew dark before approaching to assess the vandalism. The coating was inferior, likely procured from a local shop. She extended her hand, her fingers gliding across the still damp surface, feeling the coarse texture of the garage panel. Crimson paint marred her fingertips, the identical hue of the emergency illumination devices she once carried in combat theaters. A motorcycle's engine roar echoed from a distance, then dissipated. Nadia's musculature tensed instinctively, but she compelled herself to maintain an unaffected demeanor. There was no need to alert the neighbors to any peculiarity. She had learned long ago that projecting an ordinary facade was its own form of protection. Moving toward her residence, Nadia observed the subtle indicators that would reveal any attempted intrusion. The placement of the welcome mat, the nearly invisible filament she habitually secured across the doorway, the faint abrasions she marked on the handle. Everything remained precisely as she had left it. Inside, she proceeded through her nightly ritual with deliberate accuracy. Verify the rear entryway. Secured. Windows fastened. Communication device charged. She drew the draperies, adjusted the climate control, and poured a glass of water from the tap. Mundane actions that bolstered the pretense of normalcy, even as her intellect charted defensive postures and disengagement routes. The culinary space was immaculate, precisely as she always maintained it. The countertops gleamed under the soft overhead illumination. Utensils were dried and stowed, each item in its designated position. Control what you can influence. It was among the initial directives she internalized during her tenure with Delta Force. Nadia occupied her kitchen table, the robust oak surface cool beneath her forearms. The dwelling was quiescent, save for the low thrum of the refrigeration unit and the sporadic click of the heating apparatus. She reached down and opened the lower compartment, shifting aside culinary instruments to expose a small, intricately carved wooden receptacle concealed at the rear. The container was handcrafted maple, a memento from her departed spouse. The wood had darkened with the passage of time, rendered smooth by years of handling. She carefully lifted it onto the table, her digits locating the familiar indentation that granted access to its contents. Within, resting on dark blue velvet, lay her Delta Force commendations. The gilded and argent surfaces reflected the kitchen light, each one a testament to covert operations she could never divulge. Lives preserved and extinguished in locales that held no official existence. She seldom regarded them anymore. They belonged to a separate existence, a distinct individual. Yet tonight, as her fingers traced the contours of a silver star, Nadia felt the burden of her past pressing upon her present. The medals were more than mere adornments. They served as reminders of her inherent capabilities when provoked. She had merited each one by retaining composure amidst pandemonium, by safeguarding others, by steadfastly refusing to yield when lives hung in the balance. The vermilion coating on her garage door was not merely a threat. It constituted a provocation. These individuals believed they were confronting a defenseless target, a solitary woman they could subjugate into compliance. They possessed no comprehension of the adversary they had incited. Nadia wiped her paint-stained fingers across the fabric of her trousers, leaving crimson smears on the denim. Her countenance remained impassive. Yet her gaze had acquired the sharp acuity her former unit would have recognized instantaneously. The morning sun cast elongated shadows along Main Street as Nadia navigated into the Sheriff's Department parking area. The edifice was a modest brick structure exhibiting signs of wear, with faded inscriptions on its windows and portions of missing grout between the masonry. 2 patrol vehicles stood at the fore, their white exteriors dulled by road grime. Within, the fluorescent lamps hummed overhead, casting a stark glare upon the worn linoleum flooring. The reception area exuded an aroma of stale coffee and aged paper documents. A youthful deputy looked up from his crossword puzzle, his expression transitioning from ennui to weariness as Nadia approached. "May I be of assistance?" he inquired, subtly adjusting his posture. "I require the filing of a report," Nadia stated, maintaining a steady, professional tone. "Is Sheriff Wilkes accessible?" The deputy retrieved his telephone, uttered a brief remark into it, then gestured toward a series of hard plastic seats lining the wall. "Please be seated. He will attend to you momentarily." Nadia sat, her posture erect, hands clasped in her lap. The walls were adorned with time-worn wanted posters and antiquated community announcements. A clock ticked audibly, its hands advancing with agonizing sluggishness. 20 minutes elapsed before heavy footfalls emanated from the hallway. Sheriff Cal Wilkes filled the entryway of his office. His uniform strained taut across his considerable midsection. His badge glinted in the fluorescent light as he shifted, a flicker of gold that mirrored the signet ring on his substantial digit. He offered no smile as he motioned for Nadia to enter. "What prompts your visit today?" Wilkes inquired, lowering himself into his groaning desk chair. His office was disarrayed with documents, depleted coffee receptacles, and a collection of hunting trophies mounted on the walls. A taxidermied deer's head stared downward with glass eyes, its expression frozen in perpetual astonishment. Nadia occupied the seat opposite him, noting its positioning slightly below his. A subtle display of authority she had witnessed countless times previously. "My property was defaced last night," she declared. "Threats were spray-painted on my garage door." Wilkes procured a writing implement, twirling it between his digits. "Threats, you say? What nature of threats?" "Death pronouncements," Nadia affirmed, accompanied by derogatory epithets. "The paint was still moist when I returned home." "Uh-huh." Wilkes inscribed something on a pad. "Do you have any notion of the perpetrator's identity?" "Yes," Nadia stated. "Ray Maddox and his associates from Bulldog's Den. There was an altercation at the establishment yesterday evening." "Oh," Wilkes interjected, his eyebrows arching. "What sort of altercation?" Nadia recounted the events at the establishment, preserving a neutral and factual tone. As she spoke, she observed Wilkes's expression becoming increasingly indifferent, his pen tapping against the desk with palpable impatience. "So, you physically engaged Mr. Maddox?" he posed, emphasizing the "you" in a manner that betrayed his implicit bias. "I defended myself against attempted sexual assault," Nadia corrected with firm resolve. "And now I am being subjected to threats." Wilkes reclined in his chair, which creaked under his mass. "It appears to me that you may have overreacted. A good old boy. Simply engaging in some revelry. No necessity to escalate it to a federal matter. A good old boy who assaulted me and subsequently vandalized my domicile with death threats," Nadia articulated, her voice measured yet intense. "I wish to formally register a complaint." The sheriff exhaled audibly, as if she were being unreasonable. "Listen, Ms." He glanced down at his notepad. "Carter, this is a small community. We address matters differently here. Less documentation, more mutual understanding, if you grasp my meaning." "I comprehend precisely what you imply," Nadia replied. "Nevertheless, I still wish to submit that complaint." Wilkes's countenance stiffened slightly. He extracted a form from his desk drawer and commenced filling it out with ostentatious slowness. "Address?" Nadia furnished her particulars, observing as he deliberately misspelled her street designation. "And you indicate this occurred at what specific juncture?" "Last evening, between the hours of 10 and 11 post-meridium." "Curious," Wilkes remarked, without averting his gaze. "No other individuals reported observing anything unusual in that vicinity." The coating remained damp, Nadia reiterated. "I possess photographic evidence on my mobile device." "Well, you are aware of the nature of these incidents," Wilkes posited, his tone patronizing. "Difficult to establish culpability. It could have been anyone. Juveniles, perhaps. Or," he paused meaningfully, "you might have executed it yourself to attract attention." Nadia's expression remained unaltered, yet her voice assumed an edge of steely resolve. "Are you insinuating that I applied spray paint with death threats to my own garage door?" "I am not suggesting any particularity," Wilkes responded, raising his hands in a gesture of feigned innocence. "Merely exploring all conceivable avenues. That is the essence of police work, madam. Will you undertake an investigation or not?" Nadia pressed, leaning forward slightly in her seat. The sheriff's veneer of professional courtesy fractured, his lips curling into a sneer, his eyes narrowing as he regarded her. Perhaps if your kind understood your appropriate station, such occurrences would be averted. The pronouncements lingered in the atmosphere like a toxic effluvium. Nadia rose deliberately, her movements measured and controlled. The overhead fluorescent illumination flickered, casting peculiar phantoms across Wilkes's countenance as he stared upward at her with barely concealed disdain. Without uttering another word, Nadia turned and departed the office. Her boots echoed on the linoleum flooring, each step precise and deliberate. The young deputy stationed at the front desk quickly averted his gaze to his crossword puzzle as she passed, affecting ignorance of the preceding exchange. The morning sun felt excessively brilliant as she stepped outside. The atmosphere was thick with humidity. Nadia walked to her vehicle, sensing the weight of the sheriff's scrutiny through his office window. The system she had once sworn allegiance to and protected had just unequivocally communicated that she stood alone. The Veteran Sanctuary occupied a venerable brick warehouse on the outskirts of town, its weathered facade softened by window boxes brimming with vibrant marigolds. Inside, the morning light cascaded through tall panes, illuminating the worn yet pristine common area, where a dozen veterans convened for coffee and conversation. Nadia pushed open the substantial entrance portal, the familiar aroma of coffee and wood polish welcoming her. The tension stemming from her encounter with Sheriff Wilkes began to dissipate as she entered this haven. Here, at the very least, she could effect a positive change. "Good morning, Sergeant Major." Marcus Hill's voice carried across the room. He stood near the coffee station, tools arrayed on the counter around a disassembled coffee maker. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his t-shirt already bore a grease stain, despite the early hour. "Just Nadia here, Marcus," she reminded him with a faint smile. "How is our patient faring?" Marcus gestured toward the scattered components. "A terminal affliction of calcareous deposits, but I believe we can salvage it." His hands, steady and adept from years of military mechanical service, moved with assurance among the pieces. Nadia drew up a chair beside him, examining the disassembled apparatus. "It brings to mind Field stripping an M4, she observed, selecting a clogged filter basket. "Except this one retaliates with hot water." Marcus chuckled, rubbing a phantom burn on his hand. "It has already afflicted me once this morning." They labored in tandem, Marcus elucidating each phase as he cleansed and reassembled the parts. Other veterans meandered by, offering commentary and recollections of military coffee-making expeditions. The ambience was light, therapeutic in its inherent simplicity. "Pass me that descaling solution," Marcus requested, indicating a cerulean bottle. "This contraption possesses more accumulated residue than a forward operating base latrine." Nadia handed him the bottle, erupting in laughter. "That is quite a vivid mental image I did not require this morning." Speaking of undesirable elements, Marcus remarked, his voice lowering slightly. "How are you managing?" Word travels swiftly in a small community. Nadia's hands paused momentarily. "News propagates with haste, I perceive." Pete from a service station witnessed the entire event at Bulldogs, Marcus elucidated, focusing intently on scouring a particularly tenacious patch of scale. "He mentioned you handled it with professional competence." "I managed," Nadia stated plainly, offering no further explanation. They continued their work in comfortable silence for a period, the clinking of tools and subdued exchanges among other veterans filling the air. The coffee maker gradually materialized under Marcus's skilled manipulation. Each component cleansed and appropriately aligned. "You know what I occasionally yearn for?" Marcus mused, reconnecting the water conduits. "The certainty. In the military, you were assured of having allies watching your back. Out here." He shrugged, leaving the thought incomplete. Nadia nodded, comprehending his sentiment precisely. "The regulations are dissimilar here," she remarked, "but the underlying principles remain constant. We continue to watch out for one another." Marcus smiled, his visage brightening. "That, we do." He actuated a switch, and the coffee maker began to hum to life. "Would you listen to that?" Purring like a kitten. A faint cheer arose from the veterans awaiting nearby. Marcus filled a cup and presented it to Nadia with a flourish. The inaugural test subject. She took a sip and nodded in approval. "Decidedly superior to the motor oil we were consuming previously." The morning progressed peacefully. Nadia moved throughout the sanctuary, conferring with veterans, assisting with administrative tasks, and offering quiet words of encouragement where necessary. This was the reason she had selected this establishment following her departure from active service: the opportunity to aid others in regaining their equilibrium. Around mid-morning, Marcus approached her once more. His earlier cheerfulness had diminished, supplanted by a troubled frown. "Hey, Nadia, can we converse for a moment?" She followed him to a secluded alcove within the sanctuary, noting the tension in his shoulders. "What is occupying your thoughts?" Marcus glanced around before speaking, his voice hushed. "I was here late last night completing some maintenance tasks. I observed something that seemed incongruous." Nadia waited patiently as Marcus collected his thoughts. "There were motorcyclists," he continued. 3 of them on Harleys. They traversed the perimeter 4 times, at a notably leisurely pace, continuously observing the sanctuary. I recognized one of them from Bulldog's contingent. The warmth of the morning seemed to recede as Nadia processed this revelation. Her expression hardened, though her voice maintained its composure. "At what hour did this transpire?" "Approximately 11 o'clock. I was securing the premises when I initially noticed them." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. They were not merely passing through, Nadia. They were observing, scrutinizing the location. Nadia's mind rapidly assessed the sanctuary's vulnerabilities: antiquated locking mechanisms, an absence of surveillance cameras, numerous ground-level windows, an overabundance of ingress points, a dearth of egress routes. "Did they observe you?" she inquired. Marcus shook his head. "I remained concealed in the shadows. Old habits, you understand." "Sound instincts," Nadia affirmed. She surveyed the sanctuary, observing the veterans engaged in their morning pursuits. Some were still grappling with the transition to civilian life, while others were finally finding their footing. All of them vulnerable. "I did not wish to cause you concern," Marcus stated quietly. "But following the incident at the bar, I believed you should be informed." Nadia placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a gentle squeeze. "You acted appropriately, Marcus." "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, witnessing the morning light play across the sanctuary's aged wooden floors. The coffee maker hummed in the background, a subtle reminder of their earlier moment of tranquility. Marcus cleared his throat. "What do you surmise their objective is?" Nadia's expression remained controlled, but her eyes had adopted a familiar tactical intensity. Ray was no longer merely targeting her. He was extending his threats to encompass the individuals and places she held dear: the sanctuary, the veterans, her newfound purpose. The evening sun cast elongated shadows across the sanctuary's parking lot as Nadia and Marcus concluded their closing procedures. She inspected the locks on the storage closet while he disposed of the coffee grounds and wiped down the counter. The familiar routines had acquired a different gravitas following their morning discourse concerning the circling motorcyclists. "You are not obligated to remain beyond schedule," Nadia commented, observing Marcus meticulously cleansing the coffee maker he had repaired earlier. "I always execute my duties with meticulousness," he responded, without looking up. "Furthermore, 2 sets of eyes are more effective than 1. The sanctuary felt altered by nightfall. The convivial community atmosphere of daylight hours transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and obscured vantage points. Every window represented a potential point of entry. Every darkened recess a conceivable hiding place. Nadia moved through the chambers with practiced proficiency. Her military conditioning subconsciously manifested in her method of clearing each area. Marcus followed her lead, his own service experience evident in his positioning to monitor the approaches while she secured the premises. They worked in comfortable silence, communicating through subtle gestures and nods, the innate synchronicity of individuals trained to operate as a cohesive unit. "The final entryway," Nadia announced, extracting the keys for the main portal. The parking lot illumination had activated, creating pockets of amber light in the encroaching twilight. A distant engine rumble captured their attention. Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that was absent. "That sounds like more than 3 motorcycles." Nadia nodded, her expression composed yet alert. "Proceed inside the entryway. It offers substantial cover and an unimpeded field of vision." The rumble intensified, reverberating against the structures. Headlights appeared at the terminus of the street, sweeping across the lot in aggressive arcs. 5 motorcycles roared into view, their riders hunched forward like predators. Ray Bulldog Maddox led the formation. His imposing physique appeared even more formidable encased in a leather vest adorned with crude emblems. The motorcycles circled the lot, churning up gravel and dust, their engines thundering within the confined expanse. Maintain composure, Nadia murmured to Marcus, observing his shoulders squaring in preparation for confrontation. Allow them to initiate the engagement. The motorcyclists formed a loose semicircle facing the sanctuary's entrance. Ray deactivated his engine first, the abrupt silence proving nearly as unnerving as the preceding noise. His retinue followed suit, leaving only the ticking of cooling engines and the harsh glare of headlights. Well, well, Ray bellowed, his voice imbued with a malevolent inflection. If it isn't the impertinent woman who presumes to humiliate me within my own establishment. He dismounted his motorcycle, his boots crunching on the gravel. And look, she has acquired a pet as well. Marcus advanced a partial step, but Nadia's hand darted out, halting him. Easy, she whispered. That is precisely their objective. Ray's contingent dispersed, expanding the arc. They were all physically imposing individuals, selected more for their bulk than their intellect, attired in matching vests and exuding menacing expressions. Two brandished heavy chains wound around their fists. Another flexed a set of brass knuckles. Is this your modest philanthropic establishment? Ray inquired, gesturing toward the sanctuary with feigned curiosity. Where you gather all the broken soldiers incapable of functioning in the real world. Private property? Nadia stated with clarity, her voice resonating across the lot. You are not welcome here. Ray expectorated onto the ground. Nothing about this is private. This is my domain. He advanced a few paces, attempting to leverage his stature for intimidation. And in my domain, individuals exhibit due deference. The other motorcyclists vocalized crude encouragement, their voices laced with epithets and threats. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he maintained his position, adhering to Nadia's guidance. One final admonition, Ray growled. Now close enough that Nadia could detect the aroma of alcohol and tobacco on his breath. Kneel and offer an apology for that charade you perpetrated, or we shall undertake a redecoration of this establishment, perhaps commencing with that ostentatious coffee apparatus your companion regards with such pride. Nadia did not yield an inch. Her voice remained steady, almost conversational. Do you comprehend your fundamental error, Ray? You conflate apprehension with respect. She met his gaze directly. I have witnessed genuine respect. Earned it. Bestowed it. What you command. It is merely the acquiescence of individuals too weary to resist. Ray's countenance darkened with fury. He reached for her, his immense hand targeting her throat. But Nadia was no longer present. She had shifted slightly, just enough that his grasp encountered empty space. Do not, she stated quietly. The word conveyed such authority that Ree actually hesitated. Something in her posture, in the absolute absence of trepidation in her eyes, caused him to pause. You were fortunate at the establishment, he snarled, attempting to mask his momentary uncertainty. But there are 5 of us now, and there are no surveillance devices out here to document what transpires subsequently. Nadia advanced a single, precise step, positioning herself between the motorcyclists and the sanctuary door. Her movement was fluid, controlled, and paradoxically more menacing than any aggressive gesture could have been. You do not desire this confrontation, she declared, her voice clearly audible to every motorcyclist. The parking lot lights cast a silhouette elongated behind her, a solitary dark line against their semicircle of menace. Something in her tone, or perhaps in the manner she stood, perfectly balanced, her hands relaxed at her sides, caused the other motorcyclists to shift uneasily. They had anticipated dread, weeping, and desperate entreaties. Instead, they confronted an enigma that unsettled them profoundly. Ree, his countenance contorted by bewilderment and ire, fixed his gaze upon her for an extended period. Then, with a brusque pivot, he strode back to his motorcycle. Let's roll, he commanded his cohort, his voice gruff. This is far from over, miss. We'll be back when you least anticipate it. The motorcyclists remounted, their engines erupting to life. They rocketed out of the lot, scattering gravel and spewing exhaust fumes, their parting threats nearly swallowed by the cacophony of their departure. Morning sunlight, a warm benediction, streamed through the shelter's windows, painting golden rectangles upon the well-worn linoleum. Nadia stood before a gathering of veterans assembled in the central hall. Approximately 15 faces regarded her, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in their eyes. Marcus, seated at the forefront, had shed his characteristic easy smile, replaced by an intense focus. I've convened you all here because we must have a candid discussion, Nadia commenced, her tone measured yet resolute. Most of you are aware of the incident at Bulldog's bar. What you aren't privy to is the escalation of this matter. They've issued threats against the shelter, and by extension, against each and every one of us. A ripple of murmurs swept through the assembly. A few of the younger veterans exchanged uneasy glances. "Look," interjected Sarah Chen, a former army medic who had been attending the shelter for 3 months. "We all deeply appreciate what you do here, Nadia. However, perhaps we should simply contact the authorities." "I've already tried," Nadia responded, a weariness in her voice as she shook her head. The sheriff made his allegiances abundantly clear. "We are entirely on our own." A hush fell over the room. These veterans understood implicitly the implications of lacking support, of confronting danger in isolation. "But that does not equate to helplessness," Nadia continued. She retrieved her wooden case, the receptacle for her commendations, and placed it on a nearby table. "There is something I must share with you. Something that might prove invaluable to our collective situation." She unlatched the case, revealing rows of decorations that prompted several veterans to sit up straighter. Combat insignia, distinguished service awards, and specialized qualification pins gleamed in the morning light. "I served for 20 years, Nadia stated, her fingers brushing against one of the medals. 15 of those with Delta Force. I was more than just a soldier, I was an instructor. I trained elite operatives to endure when all seemed lost, to safeguard themselves and others when vastly outnumbered and alone. For the latter portion of my tenure, I specialized in instructing small units on siege mitigation and defensive strategies against superior forces." Nadia's gaze swept across the room, making contact with each individual present. "I can impart those very skills to you, not for aggression or retribution, but for the preservation of yourselves and this sanctuary we have painstakingly established together." Marcus leaned forward. "Are you suggesting a program for self-defense training?" Nadia inclined her head. "Basic yet effective techniques, methods for de-escalating situations without resorting to undue force. Most crucially, I aim to cultivate your capacity for teamwork, for looking out for one another's well-being." "I'm in," Marcus declared without hesitation. "Count me in too," Sarah added. Her previous reservations vanished. One by one, the others voiced their assent. Even Tom Wheeler, a reserved Vietnam veteran who typically maintained a solitary demeanor, raised his hand in affirmation. "Very well," Nadia announced, closing her medal case. "Let us relocate outdoors. The grounds behind the shelter will serve our purpose admirably for the demonstration." They proceeded out into the crisp morning air. The yard itself was unassuming, a patch of grass punctuated by a few scattered picnic tables, yet it offered privacy, enclosed by a tall wooden fence. "First things first," Nadia instructed, positioning herself at the center of the group. "Discard any notions derived from cinematic portrayals. Genuine self-defense is not about elaborate maneuvers or dramatic confrontations. It is fundamentally about situational awareness, strategic positioning, and simple, effective techniques deployable under duress." She demonstrated a fundamental stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly flexed. This forms your bedrock. Equilibrium is paramount. Should someone grasp you, your initial impulse may be to recoil. Instead, I want you to lower your center of gravity and pivot towards them. Nadia beckoned Marcus to assist with the demonstration. He assumed the role of the aggressor, reaching to seize her arm. In a fluid motion, she shifted her weight, turned, and leveraged his own momentum to disrupt his balance. Observe, no brute strength is requisite, merely correct posture and opportune timing. She assisted Marcus in regaining his footing. "Now, form yourselves into pairs. We shall practice this at a measured pace." The veterans, initially with some awkwardness, formed pairs. Sarah partnered with Jenny Torres, a former helicopter mechanic. Tom Wheeler joined forces with Mike Collins, who had served in Desert Storm. "Gentle movements," Nadia called out, moving between the pairs. "Concentrate on discerning the pivot points. Refrain from overpowering the movement." Initially, their actions were stiff and hesitant. However, as they continued their practice, a transformation began to occur. Their bodies seemed to recall dormant training. Muscle memory reasserted itself. Laughter began to erupt as partners alternated in executing the techniques. "That's it, Sarah. Excellent pivot," Nadia encouraged. "Tom, try lowering your weight a bit more." "Precisely." The morning sun climbed higher as their efforts progressed. Nadia introduced additional techniques, methods for escaping common restraints, strategies for creating distance when cornered, and proper techniques for falling safely if taken to the ground. Remember, she emphasized, demonstrating a straightforward wrist release, the objective is not combat. It is to generate an opening for escape or to summon assistance.
No recklessness, no gratuitous risks.
Jenny, who had been largely silent throughout the morning, suddenly executed a flawless escape maneuver, causing Sarah to stagger backward. Both women broke into exclamations of surprised laughter. "I truly didn't believe I possessed that capability," Jenny remarked, gazing at her hands with newfound admiration. "All of you are capable of far more than you realize," Nadia assured her. "That is the purpose of today's endeavor. To reawaken your inherent strength, your training, your capacity to protect yourselves and each other." The yard resonated with the sounds of movement and mutual encouragement. Veterans who had arrived with visible tension and worry now moved with an escalating sense of confidence. They exchanged tips, celebrated minor successes, and navigated challenges collaboratively. Tom Wheeler, who had spoken minimally all morning, managed to break free from a hold that had previously proven difficult. His characteristic distant expression softened into a modest yet sincere smile. "You're all doing exceptionally well," Nadia announced, observing Marcus assisting Mike in refining his stance. "This is merely the initial phase. We will persist in practicing, in refining our abilities." The morning sun now bathed the yard in its full intensity, glinting off determined visages and proud smiles. These were no longer broken soldiers. They were a cohesive unit, rediscovering their collective strength, unity, and purpose in safeguarding what they had painstakingly constructed. Nadia occupied her parked vehicle 2 blocks distant from Ree's establishment, the engine silenced and the lights extinguished. The dashboard clock displayed 11:42 post-meridian. She had observed a recurring pattern over the preceding days. Every Tuesday evening, Ree's crew reconvened at the bar prior to their midnight departure in convoy. Tonight, she was prepared. Clad in dark attire and sturdy boots, her hair concealed beneath a black cap, she carried a compact backpack containing her camera equipped with a telephoto lens, equipment she had not employed since her surveillance assignments. Precisely as anticipated, motorcycle engines roared to life in the bar's parking area. Nadia counted 8 motorcycles, with Ree's distinctive chrome-laden Harley leading the procession. They merged onto the main thoroughfare, proceeding eastward. Nadia waited until they were approximately half a block ahead before commencing her own journey. She deliberately kept her headlights off until the last feasible moment, maintaining a discreet distance. The acquired skills returned with effortless fluidity, timing the intervals between turns, monitoring taillights, and preserving a sufficient gap to evade detection. The motorcyclists navigated through the sleeping municipality, eventually veering onto Industrial Drive. Old warehouses, mostly dark and silent at this late hour, lined both sides of the street. Ree's contingent pulled up to a nondescript grey edifice bearing faded numerals, 1849. Nadia drove past at a measured pace, mentally mapping the layout. She circumnavigated the block and parked behind a derelict factory situated 2 buildings down. Moving with absolute stealth, she retrieved her backpack and proceeded through the shadows. A corroded fire escape on the adjacent structure caught her attention. She tested the lowest rung. It felt sufficiently secure. With practiced agility, she ascended, her boots making no sound on the metal treads. The rooftop provided an unobstructed panorama overlooking the warehouse's loading dock. Below, Ree directed his men as they unsealed the warehouse doors. A box truck reversed into position, its engine emitting a low hum. Nadia positioned her camera, adjusting the focus in the ambient gloom. Through the lens, she observed Ree engaging in a handshake with the truck driver. The loading dock security illumination clearly illuminated their faces. 2 bikers proceeded to open the truck's rear doors, revealing stacks of boxes. Nadia's finger repeatedly depressed the shutter button, meticulously capturing every detail. The individuals worked with practiced efficiency, transferring boxes from the truck into an interior storage area. Ree oversaw the operation, periodically consulting his mobile device and surveying the deserted street. He remained entirely unaware that, 20 feet above, a former Delta Force commander was meticulously documenting his activities. Nadia zoomed in on the boxes themselves. One had sustained minor damage, revealing contained bags of a white powdery substance. She photographed the markings on the box's flank, a shipping label that could potentially aid in tracing its origin. A gust of wind carried fragments of conversation upwards. The prices increased, The truck driver's voice drifted. Suppliers are growing apprehensive about federal scrutiny. Inform him to maintain composure, Ree responded. The sheriff is in our pocket. No one is scrutinizing anything in this vicinity with undue diligence. Nadia's camera continued its rhythmic clicking. Ree counted out a sum of currency, passing it to the driver. The transaction was clearly discernible within her viewfinder. Faces, money, contraband, all meticulously recorded with military precision. The operation spanned approximately 40 minutes. Nadia photographed the truck's license plate as it departed. She captured sharp images of each biker's face as they loaded smaller parcels from the boxes into their saddlebags. Ree conducted a final inspection of the warehouse before securing it. Nadia photographed him as he pocketed a key and entered a code into the security panel. Her trained eye noted the sequence: 5, 2, 8, 1, 9. The bikers remounted and rode off into the darkness. Nadia waited for 10 minutes, ensuring their complete departure, before descending the fire escape. Her movements were as silent on the descent as they had been on the ascent. Back in her vehicle, she reviewed the camera's display. The photographs were sharp and incriminating. She had documented Ree and his entire operation comprehensively. Faces, location, product, financial exchanges, all the requisite elements to dismantle their enterprise. The drive back traversed deserted avenues. Nadia remained vigilant, periodically checking her rearview mirror for any indication of pursuit, but the night remained undisturbed. The bikers were long gone, presumably retreated to whatever secluded locations they frequented after concluding their illicit business. She guided her car into her garage, closing the door before illuminating any interior lights. Inside, she connected the camera to her printer. While the photographs processed, she opened a discreet safe concealed behind a false panel in her closet. The images emerged sequentially: Ree counting currency, crates of illicit substances being unloaded, clear visages of every participant, the truck's license plate, the shipping label, a complete record of the night's criminal undertaking. Nadia meticulously examined each photograph, her trained eye discerning every detail of potential utility. She arranged them chronologically, constructing a lucid narrative of the operation. These were not mere images. They constituted evidence captured with the exactitude of one who had documented counterinsurgency operations in theaters of war. The safe remained open, its contents sparse yet significant. Her most crucial documents, a few mementos from her military service, and now, these photographs capable of dismantling Ree's entire organization. She placed the stack of images inside, alongside the camera's memory card. As she rotated the safe style, Nadia contemplated the critical element of timing. The photographs possessed considerable weight, but their deployment necessitated meticulous strategizing. Acting prematurely might allow Ree to elude capture. Delaying too long could result in further harm to innocent individuals. The evidence required strategic dissemination, akin to any other instrument within her arsenal. She closed the false panel, ensuring its perfect alignment with the surrounding wall. To any casual observer, the closet would appear entirely ordinary, containing nothing more than clothing and footwear. Yet, concealed behind that facade lay sufficient evidence to obliterate Ree's world. The piercing shriek of sirens shattered the pre-dawn stillness, jolting Nadia from her slumber. Her military conditioning took immediate precedence, even before her eyes fully opened. She was already pulling on her boots when her phone vibrated. A text message from one of her veterans: "Shelter on fire." Her heart momentarily seized. Then, she was in motion, grabbing her keys and accelerating towards her vehicle. The drive, typically a 10-minute journey, felt interminable. Even as she pushed her sedan well beyond the posted speed limit, the Inferno's glow illuminated the sky ahead, intensifying with every block traversed. As she rounded the final corner, the sight struck her with the force of a physical blow. Vermilion flames consumed the veteran shelter, reaching skyward with voracious intensity. Black smoke billowed from shattered windows. 2 fire engines were already on site, firefighters diligently maneuvering hoses into position. However, it was the scene unfolding directly before the building that sent a chill through her. Marcus lay on the ground, surrounded by fellow veterans. His right arm bore an angry red hue, blisters already beginning to form. His face was streaked with soot, and he coughed uncontrollably, struggling to clear his lungs of smoke. Nadia sprinted forward, dropping to her knees beside him. "Marcus, what happened?" Her hands moved with practiced automaticity, assessing his vital signs as she had countless times in combat zones. "Ree, guys, Marcus managed between ragged breaths. He threw something through the window. It exploded. He winced as a wave of pain radiated from his burned arm. I was asleep in the back office. Heard the glass shatter. Got everyone else out first. Other veterans gravitated towards them, some wrapped in emergency blankets, others receiving treatment from paramedics for smoke inhalation. The shelter had become a haven for many, a secure space to rebuild their lives. Now, they watched its destruction, their faces mirroring both the flames and their profound shock. How many were injured? Nadia inquired, her voice steady despite the burgeoning fury within her. Just me, mostly, Marcus stated. Got the worst of it pulling Jerry out. He has asthma. Couldn't breathe in the smoke. He gestured towards an ambulance where Jerry was seated, fitted with an oxygen mask. The intense heat emanating from the fire pressed against them like an impalpable barrier. Firefighters issued commands, their water streams forming great arcs that seemed pitifully inadequate against the conflagration. The building's roof groaned ominously. Nadia observed Marcus shivering despite the ambient warmth. Shock was setting in. She removed her jacket and draped it over his shoulders, taking care to avoid his injured limb. The paramedics need to examine that burn. In a moment, Marcus replied, his good hand suddenly gripping hers with surprising strength. They were laughing, Nadia. When they threw it in, I heard them laughing. The muscles in Nadia's jaw tightened. She had witnessed such callousness before, emanating from warlords who believed themselves invincible, who reveled in annihilating other sense of security. But this was not a distant battlefield. This was her home. A deafening crash drew their attention as a section of the roof collapsed inward. Sparks erupted skyward like a swarm of fireflies. The veterans flinched at the sound, a stark reminder of the combat zones they had left behind. Everything we built, Marcus lamented, his voice cracking. All the work we accomplished, the counseling rooms, the workshop, it's all burning. Nadia watched as the flames consumed the place into which she had poured her heart for the past 2 years. The kitchen where they shared meals. The common room where veterans found camaraderie and understanding. The small library filled with donated books. All of it turning to ash because Ree could not tolerate being humiliated by a woman. She thought of the photographs secured in her safe, the evidence she had meticulously gathered. She had intended a strategic, measured approach, but Ree had irrevocably altered the landscape. He had crossed a threshold that could not be uncrossed. Marcus coughed again, his entire frame trembling with the effort. A paramedic approached, kit in hand, but Marcus waved her away for a brief instant. His eyes, filled with pain yet unwavering in their resolve, met Nadia's. Don't let them triumph, he whispered, squeezing her hand. We are soldiers. We do not permit bullies to prevail. His words struck Nadia with visceral impact. She gazed up at the burning structure, witnessing years of effort and hope dissolving into smoke. However, buildings could be reconstructed. What held paramount importance were the lives within them, lives Ree had just attempted to extinguish. Her training surged to the forefront, enabling her to analyze the situation with stark clarity. Ree had escalated to attempted murder. He had attacked not merely her, but the vulnerable individuals she had pledged to protect. In doing so, he had provided her with every justification necessary to respond with overwhelming force. The fire's reflection danced in her eyes as her resolve solidified into something formidable. This was no longer solely about self-preservation. It was about safeguarding her people, her mission, her purpose. Ree had inadvertently initiated hostilities against everything she held dear, and he was about to discover the catastrophic error of his actions. Marcus tightened his grip on her hand, perceiving the shift in her expression. He recognized that look, having witnessed it in commanders prior to significant operations. Nadia knelt beside him, sharing a silent moment of profound understanding with the young veteran who had risked his life to rescue others. Chapter 10. Fire and Fury. Scene 2. The dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of the veteran shelter, casting mocking hues of pink and gold across the sky. Nadia stood amidst the charred debris, her boots crunching on the remnants as she surveyed the devastation. The acrid stench of burnt wood and melted plastic permeated the air. Marcus stood by her side, his bandaged arm a stark white contrast against his dark skin. He had refused hospitalization, insisting on being present. Other veterans moved cautiously through the wreckage, sifting through what remained of their sanctuary. Some wore protective masks against the lingering smoke, while others donned work gloves to handle the debris. The photo wall, a voice murmured softly. Nadia turned to see Jerry, still exhibiting a slight wheeze, holding the blackened frame of what had once displayed images of veterans who had successfully reintegrated into civilian life through the shelter's programs. Now, those memories were reduced to ash and melted plastic. Across the street, townsfolk gathered in small, hushed clusters, observing the scene. Whispers were exchanged behind cupped hands, while others stared with undisguised apprehension. They all understood the perpetrator's identity, yet no one dared to voice it aloud. Ree's influence cast a pervasive shadow over the community. "Found something," Sarah called out. She emerged from what had been the kitchen, clutching a metal box. It contained the shelter's petty cash and crucial documents, mostly salvageable despite the smoke stains. Small victories felt profoundly hollow today. Nadia moved methodically through the ruins, her trained eye meticulously cataloguing every detail. The primary structural beams remained intact, but the roof had collapsed. Most of the interior walls had disintegrated. The counseling rooms, where veterans had once shared their deepest struggles, were now merely piles of scattered drywall and twisted metal. A young police officer approached tentatively, notepad in hand. "We'll need your statement regarding last night's events." "Save your ink," Nadia retorted, without making eye contact. "We both know nothing will materialize from it." The officer shifted uncomfortably but offered no argument. He, like everyone else present, was aware that the sheriff's department would not pursue this matter with any seriousness. As the morning progressed, additional veterans arrived. They came directly from their work shifts or homes, still attired in civilian clothing but carrying themselves with a discernible military bearing. Everyone's expression turned grim upon witnessing the devastation, a surge of remembered anguish mingling with fresh fury. My equipment, Mike, a former Marine who conducted woodworking sessions at the shelter's workshop, grumbled. He nudged a scorched workbench with his foot. "All of it, gone. Even my grandfather's lathe." Nadia observed her community, recognizing them as her people, her charge, her family, sifting through the ruins of their aspirations. The shelter had represented far more than mere structure. It was their sanctuary for rediscovering purpose, a place where their deepest fears receded and optimism flourished. Ree hadn't merely targeted property, he had sought to obliterate their path to recovery. A news van arrived, its reporter already rehearsing lines about a devastating blaze and an ongoing inquiry. Nadia intercepted them before they could begin filming. "No statements," she declared, her voice firm. "This is not your narrative to craft." As the morning progressed, the veterans worked with methodical efficiency, segregating salvageable items and clearing pathways through the rubble. They naturally coalesced into teams, coordinating efforts seamlessly, their service-honed instincts taking over. Marcus stumbled unexpectedly, his injured arm compromising his balance as he attempted to shift a fallen beam. 3 veterans swiftly moved to support him, their actions quick and precise. The unspoken connection between them was palpable, forged during their service, reinforced by their recovery, and now tested by this new assault. "You ought to get some rest," Nadia advised him. Marcus, however, shook his head. "Can't rest while there's work to be done, Sergeant Major," he replied, reverting to her former rank. Others had begun doing the same, unconsciously falling back into military protocols when confronting this threat. Around midday, a truck arrived. Old Mrs. Henderson from the diner emerged, carrying substantial containers of coffee and bags of sandwiches. "For your people," she said softly to Nadia. "And I'm truly sorry for staying silent for so long about Ree and his associates." More townspeople followed, bringing water, work gloves, refuse bags, small gestures of solidarity, offered hesitantly but genuinely. The underlying fear persisted, yet something else was beginning to blossom, a fragile defiance against the terror Ree had cultivated. Nadia gathered her veterans near what had been the shelter's main entrance. They formed a loose circle, instinctively establishing a security perimeter as they conferred. Their faces were smudged with soot, their clothing soiled from their labor, but their gazes were sharp and focused. "Look around," she commanded, her voice resonating with the authoritative presence she'd once wielded leading elite operatives. "They assumed this would shatter us, that we would scatter and fall silent, accepting defeat." She gestured towards the wreckage. But they overlooked something crucial. The veteran straightened, sensing a shift in her tone. This was no longer just their counselor speaking. This was a combat commander outlining a mission. "They forgot that we are trained to retaliate, that we comprehend tactical responses, strategic planning, and most importantly," she paused, making eye contact with each individual, We understand how to function as a cohesive unit. Marcus stepped forward, his bandaged arm a stark reminder of the previous night's violence. What's the strategy, Sergeant Major? Nadia swept her arm towards the devastated shelter, then towards the town beyond, where Ree and his gang believed they held dominion through fear. The morning's efforts had revealed something vital to her. They were no longer merely victims seeking solace. They were combatants who had rediscovered their cause. We will rebuild, she proclaimed, her voice carrying over the ashes. Then her eyes hardened with unyielding resolve. But first, we take the offensive to them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Nadia's dining room as she spread surveillance photographs and local maps across the oak table. 8 veterans clustered around, their expressions intent. The room was thick with the aroma of coffee and unwavering determination. Ree's compound is situated here, Nadia stated, tapping a location on the map. 3 acres enclosed by chain-link fencing. Her finger traced the perimeter. 2 primary access points, plus a rear gate. They believe no one is aware of them. Marcus leaned in, his bandaged arm resting carefully on the table's edge. Security cameras. A basic system. 4 visible cameras, likely more we cannot detect. Nadia revealed several grainy images depicting the compound's exterior, but noted, their vulnerability isn't their surveillance, it's their adherence to routine. She presented another photograph showing individuals loading boxes into trucks. Every Tuesday and Friday, at 4 o'clock in the morning, drug consignments are dispatched. The local constabulary is instructed to maintain distance. Her voice adopted the precise cadence she'd employed when planning operations abroad. That is when they are most susceptible. Sarah, a former army nurse, examined the photographs. Those aren't merely drugs. Observe the dimensions of those crates. She pointed to another image. And those young women entering the van? Human trafficking. Nadia nodded grimly. Precisely. Ree's syndicate is not solely engaged in methamphetamine distribution. They are also facilitating the passage of young women through this location. She produced more images, showing terrified faces glimpsed through vehicle windows. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Veterans who had experienced combat zones recognized the unmistakable look of profound human suffering. This was no longer a matter of retribution. It was about intervening against predators. We will require irrefutable evidence, Mike declared, the ex-Marine's voice steely. Something the federal authorities cannot disregard, even with a compromised sheriff. I am already engaged in that pursuit, Nadia replied. She unveiled a compact device, a high-resolution camera equipped with infrared capabilities. I have been documenting their activities for weeks. A tight smile touched her lips. Old habits are difficult to break. Jerry, still wheezing slightly from smoke inhalation, indicated the compound's layout. What about the guards? 3 regular night patrols, Nadia responded, placing small markers on the map. 2 positioned at the main gate, 1 mobile. They rotate shifts every 2 hours, typically drowsy by dawn. She had observed them for several nights, learning their patterns. They are careless, overconfident. Much like their leader, Marcus muttered, touching his burned arm. Nadia revealed additional documents, blueprints, guard rosters, vehicle logs. The veterans exchanged glances of admiration. She had been exceptionally busy while they focused on their recovery. We will not engage aggressively, she emphasized. This is not a raid. Our objective is to gather evidence and exert pressure. To make them err, to induce mistakes. Her finger tapped each designated position. Team 1 will establish surveillance points here and here. Team 2 will document the consignment loading process. Team 3 will secure our egress routes. The veterans absorbed the information with professional concentration. This was familiar terrain. Mission planning, strategic deployment, clearly defined objectives. What about armaments? Someone inquired. Defensive measures only. No firearms, Nadia stated unequivocally, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. We are no longer soldiers. We are civilians apprehending criminals. Everything we undertake must be lawful and meticulously recorded. She displayed a collection of small cameras and communication devices. These are our instruments of engagement now. Every interaction recorded, every threat documented. We will construct a case they are powerless to suppress. The veterans nodded, understanding dawning. They had participated in sufficient conflicts to recognize that sometimes the most intelligent triumph is achieved without firing a shot. Their compound possesses blind spots here and here. Nadia indicated specific locations on the map. We will position cameras to monitor their loading dock. Every individual's face, every vehicle's license plate, every crate will be recorded. Marcus studied the timeline she had meticulously drafted. Dawn offers optimal illumination for photography. Additionally, it coincides with their guard shift transitions and their inherent overconfidence. Mike added, they believe they have instilled enough fear to ensure universal silence. They will not anticipate anyone challenging them. Nadia distributed small radio earpieces. Communication is paramount. We operate as a unified entity, precisely as we trained. Any indication of trouble, we withdraw. No heroic actions. The veterans handled the equipment with ingrained familiarity. While these tools differed from their military-issue gear, the underlying principles remained identical. Coordinate, communicate, accomplish the mission. What about the sheriff? Sarah inquired. He will undoubtedly attempt to obstruct our efforts if he becomes aware. Let him. Nadia's smile was sharp. Every action he takes to protect them provides further evidence for the federal investigators. I have contacts within the FBI who are exceptionally interested in corrupt local officials. The room vibrated with focused intensity. These veterans had dedicated months to processing their trauma, learning to live with their injuries. Now, they possessed a renewed purpose, not overseas, but here, in their own community. Any questions? Nadia asked, surveying the assembled group. Each veteran met her gaze with unwavering resolve. They had reviewed the plans, understood their designated roles, and committed to the mission, much like in bygone days, but with significantly higher stakes. This was not about adhering to directives. It was about safeguarding their community. Excellent. Nadia checked her watch. We move at first light. Obtain some rest. Verify your equipment. Be in position by 0400 hours. The veterans straightened, unconsciously adopting military posture. They studied the maps one final time, memorizing routes and strategic positions. Years of training surged back to the forefront. The discipline, the focus, the unified purpose. Remember, Nadia said quietly, we are not undertaking this solely for ourselves. We are doing this for every resident of this town who has lived under the shadow of Ree's gang. For every young woman subjected to those trafficking vans. For everyone who believed they were compelled to remain silent. The veterans nodded in solemn agreement. Dawn would find them prepared, strategically positioned around the compound, their cameras and evidence logs ready. They would strike not with brute force, but with the unveiling of truth, exposing the darkness upon which Ree had built his empire. The faint light of dawn began to paint the horizon as Nadia led her team through the morning mist, their footsteps a hushed whisper across the damp grass. 8 figures, like phantoms, moved towards Ree's compound. The chain-link fence loomed ahead, its security lights casting stark pools of illumination. Camera 1 in position, Marcus murmured through his radio from his surveillance post. Copy that. Nadia's response was barely audible. She gestured towards Mike and Sarah, who detached from the group and headed towards the security system's power box. Their dark attire rendered them almost indistinguishable from the pre-dawn shadows. Through her night vision monocular, Nadia observed the guard at the main gate. He slouched in his seat, his phone emitting a soft glow in his hands, precisely as her surveillance had indicated. Predictable, sloppy, she thought. Ready with the cutters, Jerry whispered over the radio. He and 2 other veterans had circled to the compound's far side, where rows of motorcycles gleamed dully in the dim light. Nadia checked her watch. 4:17 a.m. The drug shipment was due to be loaded imminently. Execute, she commanded softly. Mike's hands moved with swift precision at the power box, bypassing the alarm system with practiced ease. Sarah remained vigilant, her military training evident in her utterly still posture. Within seconds, the red lights on the security cameras flickered and died. The guard remained oblivious, engrossed in his phone. At the rear of the compound, Jerry's team navigated between the parked motorcycles. Sharp metal tools glinted as they methodically punctured tire after tire. The bikes would remain upright, but incapable of movement. The damage would only become apparent when someone attempted to ride them. Cameras disabled, Mike reported. Vehicles neutralized, Jerry added. Surveillance in position, Marcus confirmed. Loading docks clear and recorded. Everything was proceeding precisely according to the plan. Nadia felt the familiar calm of a well-executed operation settle over her. This was not so dissimilar from missions conducted overseas. Identify the target, neutralize defenses, gather intelligence. The guard's phone chimed with a message. He stood, stretched, and ambled towards the compound's rear entrance. Likely a restroom break, Nadia noted mentally. Another predictable pattern she had anticipated. Proceeding to Phase 2, she murmured. Sarah and Mike melted into the shadows, advancing towards the main building's electrical panel. This blackout required flawless timing. Too early, and they would alert the occupants. Too late, and they would miss the crucial evidence they needed. Within the compound, voices grew louder. The loading crew was commencing their day's work. Truck engines rumbled to life. Metal doors scraped open. First truck moving to the dock, Marcus reported from his concealed vantage point. His camera clicked softly, capturing every face, every license plate. Nadia moved closer, using the parked vehicles for cover. Through gaps between the trucks, she could observe Reed directing workers, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn stillness. Move it, you lazy bastards. We are behind schedule. More bikers emerged from the building, carrying crates and boxes. Some escorted young women, their faces etched with fear in the harsh artificial light. Sarah's sharp intake of breath crackled over the radio. Witnessing trafficking victims up close was profoundly different from studying photographs. Steady, Nadia reminded her team. Document everything. Camera shutters clicked softly from multiple locations. Every angle was covered, every criminal act meticulously recorded. The pile of evidence grew with each passing minute. Ree paced erratically between the trucks, shoving workers who moved too slowly. His confident swagger betrayed no hint of concern regarding surveillance or potential interference. Why should he be worried? He effectively owned this town. Package loaded, a biker announced. Ready to depart. That was their signal. Nadia tapped her radio. Cut the power now. The compound was instantly plunged into darkness. Shouts of surprise and anger erupted. Beams of flashlights pierced the gloom as bikers stumbled into one another. What the hell? Ree's voice boomed. Get those lights back on. But when workers attempted to start their trucks, nothing happened. Mike had accomplished more than simply cutting the power. He had disabled the engines as well. The entire operation ground to a complete halt. Confusion rapidly morphed into panic as bikers discovered their motorcycles also refused to start. Jerry's team had executed their task with thoroughness. No swift escapes were possible today. Ree's curses echoed across the compound. Find out what's happening. Nadia moved through the chaos like a wraith, her team fanning out to secure key positions. Years of nocturnal operations had instilled in them the ability to use darkness as an ally. Emergency lights flickered to life, running on backup power. In their sickly yellow glow, Ree spotted Nadia standing calmly in the center of his loading dock. Recognition and pure rage contorted his features. You, he snarled. He reached behind his back, withdrawing a hunting knife. I'll gut you myself. Surrounding them, his bikers formed a loose circle, their faces hungry for violence. Yet, none moved to assist him. Ree had to confront this alone, or forfeit his authority permanently. Nadia stood with an air of relaxed readiness, her hands loose at her sides. Last opportunity to surrender, Ree. Make it less difficult for yourself. He charged with a guttural roar, the knife slashing in a wild arc. But Nadia had been training to counter armed assailants since long before he had joined his first motorcycle gang. She stepped inside his reach, seized his knife arm, and twisted. The blade clattered harmlessly to the ground. Ree howled in pain as she forced him face down, her knee digging into his back, his arm locked agonizingly behind him. The entire takedown lasted less than 3 seconds. Stay down, she commanded, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent compound. It's over. Ree struggled futilely against her grip. Around them, his gang watched their leader pinned helplessly by the woman they had attempted to humiliate. Their world of intimidation and fear was rapidly disintegrating. Through her earpiece, Marcus's voice crackled. Got it all on camera, every second. Nadia maintained firm pressure with her knee against Ree's back as she retrieved a zip tie from her pocket. The plastic fastener snapped taut around his wrists with a satisfying click. Across the compound, Her veterans efficiently secured the remaining gang members, their military training evident in their swift, precise movements. "Marcus," she called out, "initiate the upload." From his surveillance post, Marcus began transmitting their collected evidence to secure servers. Photographs and videos detailing drug shipments, human trafficking operations, and Ree's assault streamed to waiting federal authorities. Years of the gang's criminal activities were meticulously documented in high resolution. Nadia withdrew her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice responded. Agent Cooper. The voice was sharp and professional. Sierra Delta 719, Nadia stated her former operational code. "Remember that favor you owe me from Kandahar?" There was a brief pause, followed by a low whistle. "Sergeant Major Carter, it's been a considerable time. I have a situation here requiring federal intervention. Narcotics trafficking, human smuggling, organized crime, all presented in a convenient package for collection. Text me the location. Teams are mobilizing immediately." Nadia transmitted the compound's coordinates and turned to her veterans. "Federal agents are en route. Secure the perimeter and watch for any attempts to flee." The ensuing 20 minutes passed in a state of tense anticipation. Ree squirmed occasionally beneath his restraints, but a firm press of Nadia's boot kept him immobile. His gang members sat in scattered groups, surrounded by vigilant veterans who had discovered renewed purpose in their mission. The first distant hint of approaching sirens caused the bikers to stir uneasily. Flashing red and blue lights painted the compound walls as unmarked SUVs and tactical vehicles surrounded the entrance. Armed federal agents disembarked, weapons raised. "FBI. Nobody move." Agent Cooper strode through the gate, his badge glinting. He appeared older than Nadia remembered, with streaks of grey at his temples, but his eyes remained as sharp as ever. He surveyed the scene. Dozens of bikers zip-tied on the ground, frightened trafficking victims being gently attended to by Sarah, and piles of evidence boxes under Jerry's watchful eye. "Impressive work," Cooper nodded to Nadia. "Just like old times." "The evidence is comprehensive," she replied, "including documentation of local law enforcement complicity." Cooper's eyebrows rose. "The sheriff, Cal Wilkes. He's been actively interfering for years, accepting bribes, suppressing complaints, intimidating victims." "Well then," Cooper smiled grimly, "let's pay him a visit." As FBI teams secured the compound and began processing the evidence, Cooper dispatched units to the sheriff's office. Nadia watched as Ree was hauled to his feet by agents, his face contorted with impotent rage. "This isn't over," Ree snarled at her. Nadia met his furious gaze calmly. "Actually, it is. Your operation is concluded. Your gang is finished, and you will have ample time to reflect on why you shouldn't have involved yourself with me that night." The sky was brightening as additional vehicles arrived. DEA agents began cataloging the drug shipments, while FBI human trafficking specialists gently interviewed the rescued women. The compound buzzed with professional activity, the kind of coordinated response Nadia had missed since her departure from Delta Force. Marcus approached, tablet in hand. All footage uploaded and backed up. They won't be able to bury this one. A commotion at the gate drew their attention. Sheriff Wilkes was being escorted in, handcuffs glinting on his wrists. His usual smug expression had evaporated, replaced by stunned disbelief as he comprehended the scale of the federal operation. "You can't do this," Wilkes protested. "I'm the law here." "Not anymore," Cooper replied, presenting him with the warrant. "We possess documented evidence of your corruption spanning the past 5 years. Witness testimonies, financial records, surveillance footage." Wilkes's face contorted with fury as he spotted Nadia. "You," he spat. "This is your doing." "You had a choice," Nadia said quietly. "When I came to report harassment and threats, you could have performed your duty. Instead, you opted to become part of the problem." Agent Cooper guided the sheriff towards a waiting vehicle. "We will be reviewing every case you have handled, every complaint you have dismissed. Your reign is about to undergo a thorough cleansing." The veterans congregated near Nadia as they observed the arrests unfolding. The morning sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, heralding a new day, both literally and figuratively. Mike clapped softly, initiating a quiet wave of applause that spread through the group. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "I never thought we'd see justice here." "The system functions," Nadia stated. When good people stand up and make it function, Jerry grinned, his old spark rekindled. Just as you taught us. Confront the threat, strategize the response, execute with precision. Marcus touched the burn scars on his arm, still healing from a shelter fire. They presumed to shatter our spirit. Instead, we found our resilience. They observed the departure of federal law enforcement cruisers, escorting Ree Wilkes and the other apprehended members of the syndicate. The individuals rescued from exploitation were guided to specialized transport, finally liberated from their captors' grasp. Forensic teams meticulously documented the site, meticulously assembling an irrefutable case against the criminal organization. Cooper rejoined Nadia's cadre. The prosecutor was already initiating the formal charges. With this body of proof, we are contemplating numerous federal offenses, resulting in substantial prison terms. He paused, surveying her assembled personnel. You've cultivated a remarkably effective team here. They forged themselves, Nadia countered. They simply needed a reminder of their inherent worth. The veteran straightened with a declaration, a sense of pride supplanting the unease that had shadowed them since their military discharge. They had confronted malevolence within their own community and triumphed, not through brute force, but through measured, synchronized endeavors. A subtle wave of applause rippled through the group, not the boisterous acclaim of battlefield triumph, but the quiet gratification of justice rightfully dispensed. They had safeguarded their neighbors, upheld their principles, and reaffirmed the enduring significance of their training and camaraderie in civilian life. The gentle warmth of the autumnal sun caressed the freshly applied paint adorning the walls of the Veteran Support Facility. What had arisen from adversity was far more magnificent than before. A structure of 2 stories, featuring contemporary amenities, private consultation spaces, and a fully outfitted workshop. The inscription above the entryway read Veterans Recovery Center. Although Nadia had initially resisted the notion of naming it after her, Marcus stood at the reception desk, his injured arm, now a fading pink beneath its dressings, as he welcomed a recently arrived young veteran. His kind demeanor and unwavering composure instantly put the newcomer at ease. The burns would leave permanent marks, but he bore them as emblems of courage, a testament to his stand for righteousness. Another interested party for the automotive program, Marcus announced to Nadia as she passed through the main hall. She offered a nod, a warmth of satisfaction spreading through her. The federal appropriations had not merely reconstructed their infrastructure. It had amplified their mission. Now, they provided vocational training, therapeutic services, and community outreach programs. The workshop, where Marcus instructed on fundamental vehicle maintenance, was perpetually bustling. "Good morning, Sergeant Major," Mrs. Henderson called from the kitchen. The elderly woman had begun volunteering following the arrests, providing home-cooked meals 3 times each week. She was not alone. Residents who had previously averted their gaze now appeared daily, offering assistance, contributions, and companionship. "Just Nadia," she corrected softly, accepting a mug of coffee. The morning light streamed through newly installed windows, illuminating the wisps of vapor rising from her beverage. Sarah burst through the main entrance, brandishing a newspaper. "They're facing perpetual incarceration," she declared, unfolding the publication on the counter. The headline proclaimed, "Biker syndicate leaders receive lengthy sentences, over 20 years imposed for drug trafficking and racketeering." The veterans congregated, perusing the details with evident approval. Ray Bulldog Maddox's scowling mugshot glared from the page, adjacent to a smaller depiction of former Sheriff Wilkes being escorted into the courthouse. Federal prosecutors characterized it as one of the most thorough investigations they had ever undertaken. Sarah read aloud. Evidence provided by a local veterans association proved instrumental in securing convictions. "That's your ingenuity at work," Marcus remarked to Nadia. "Your meticulous planning rendered it unassailable." She demurred. "We accomplished it collectively. Each of you played a vital role." The center buzzed with activity as additional veterans arrived for the morning sessions. In the workshop, Jerry was imparting basic welding techniques to 3 former Marines. The art therapy studio resounded with mirth as Mike's jests lightened the atmosphere during a session for post-traumatic stress disorder support. Through the window, Nadia observed townsfolk offering waves as they passed. The pervasive sense of dread that had gripped this community had vanished. Individuals walked with renewed confidence, their smiles more uninhibited, aware that the tormentors who had terrorized them were now confined. "Mails arrived," Marcus announced, sifting through the correspondence. "More contributions. Oh, and another correspondence from the governor's office." Nadia accepted the official envelope. The governor intended to bestow upon her a civilian service commendation. She had declined on 2 prior occasions. This endeavor was not about accolades or public acclaim. A pickup truck, laden with construction materials, pulled up outside. Local contractors had been donating supplies to facilitate the construction of an expansion. A dedicated wing for women, designed to aid female veterans in their reintegration into civilian life. Require assistance with unloading? Marcus inquired through the open doorway. We've got it handled. Tom Baker, the proprietor of the hardware establishment, responded. I've brought my entire crew today. He had been supplying materials since the rebuilding efforts commenced, insisting on receiving only the cost of the raw components. Nadia observed the community collaborating, the divide between veterans and civilians dissolving. This was the essence of recovery. Not merely new structures and programs, but individuals discovering their collective strength. As the day drew to a close, Nadia gathered her belongings. Departing early? Marcus inquired. Have a prior engagement, she responded playfully. They both understood the destination. It had evolved into a weekly observance. The evening air was crisp as she drove through the town. Bulldog's establishment came into view, though its signage had been altered. Under new proprietorship, it was now simply the Den. The Confederate flag that had once been flown outside had been replaced by an American one. Nadia parked in the identical location she had occupied on that pivotal night. Within, the tavern had undergone a thorough renovation. The biker memorabilia had been supplanted by photographs commemorating military service and local sports teams. The flooring had been refinished. The illumination had been enhanced. Conversations hushed as she entered, yet not out of apprehension. Heads offered respectful acknowledgements as she proceeded. The proprietor, a former Navy corpsman, had her customary whiskey prepared. On the house, he stated, presenting the glass. Nadia settled onto her customary stool, the very one she had occupied when Ree committed his fatal error. The establishment around her was transformed. Families shared early evening meals at the booths. Veterans convened for their weekly gatherings. Locals relaxed without constant vigilance. A young woman at the far end of the counter met her gaze and raised her glass subtly. She was one of the trafficking victims they had liberated, now employed as a counselor at the women's sanctuary. Nadia returned the gesture with a slight nod. The ambience of the room was relaxed, yet attentive. Everyone recognized her presence. What she symbolized. Not merely a former Delta Force commander, but an individual who had stood firm when rectitude demanded courage. Someone who had demonstrated that pervasive corruption and mistreatment need not be accepted as commonplace. The whiskey was smooth as it touched her palate with that initial sip. Sunlight slanted through pristine windows, dust motes dancing in the golden rays. The Den had evolved into what any establishment of its kind should be, a communal nexus, secure and welcoming to all. No one approached her with anything less than profound deference. None dared. But it was not apprehension that fostered their politeness. It was admiration. She had illustrated the impact of a single individual driven by conviction. More significantly, she had revealed their shared potential for achievement. The proprietor met her gaze and inclined his head, a gesture of deep esteem. Nadia raised her glass slightly, acknowledging him and the profound transformation that had occurred. The room remained hushed and observant as she took another unhurried sip, relishing not only the whiskey but the tranquility that accompanies genuine vindication.